Hello, welcome to Module 2, Part 1 for Psych. So today we're going to go over consciousness, altered states of consciousness, waking and divided consciousness, and decision-making and consciousness. Also, we'll cover hypnosis, and we'll discuss stages of sleep, including circadian rhythms and the sleep-wake cycle. We'll also go over dreams, the biology and psychoanalytic perspectives of this, and we'll cover a little bit about psychoactive drugs. So, what is consciousness? Let's talk about that. This is a person's awareness of themselves, their mental states, and their environment. So we're going to go over waking consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and divided consciousness. So consciousness helps us organize our behavior. It allows us to focus on relevant stimuli. It allows us to understand information and plan how to respond, and allows us to recognize a friend in the hallway and decide how to appropriately greet them. It also allows us to focus on driving or doing an assignment or cooking or any other focused task without major disruptions. So what is waking consciousness compared to an altered state of consciousness? Waking consciousness is when we feel alert and our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions are clear and organized. Altered states of consciousness are deviations from this normal state of awareness. So they're characterized by thoughts and perceptions that are fuzzy or unclear, disorganized, or bizarre. They could include sleeping, dreaming, hypnosis, meditation, and drug use. So what's divided consciousness? So divided consciousness is when this happens, altered states of consciousness can occur. So when we attempt to focus on two or more things, this is dividing our consciousness. Have you ever gotten in your car at work and then gotten home with barely any recollection of the drive? This is a divided consciousness experience. So here we're going to talk about a study that was done by some researchers that published in the Journal of Experimental Psychology, published by the American Psychological Association. And this research was regarding whether driver distraction comes from cell phone use specifically or conversation in general. So their full report is available to you all in the slides, but here we're just going to go over some of the main points. So even when drivers used a hands-free cell phone, driving performance was significantly compromised. Cell phone and passenger conversations differ in their impact on a driver's performance, and these differences are apparent at the operational, tactical, and strategic levels of performance. So we do know that there is a difference between cell phone and passenger conversation and their impact on a driver's performance, but we're going to talk a little bit about what those differences are. So the study was led by a researcher named Drews from the University of Utah, and they analyzed the driving performance of 41 mostly young adult drivers paired with 41 friends who served as conversation partners. People who identified as male or female gendered were equally represented. In each of these experimental conditions, of which there were 3, they were conversation with hands-free cell phone, conversation in the car, or no conversation at all. One person in each pair was randomly selected to be the driver, and the other was the conversation partner. Drivers used a sophisticated simulator that presented a 24-mile multi-lane highway with on and off ramps, overpasses, and 2-lane traffic in each direction. Participants drove under an irregular flow condition that mimics real highway conditions. So there were other vehicles, they had to comply with traffic laws, and they had to change lanes and speeds. This context required the drivers to pay attention to the surrounding traffic. In the cell phone conversation condition, drivers' conversation partners were at another location. In the in-car conversation condition, partners sat next to their simulated drivers. In both cases, conversation partners were told to tell one another a previously undisclosed close call story about a time their lives were threatened. All drivers were instructed to leave the simulated highway once they arrived at a rest area about 8 miles from the starting point. Partners were told the driver had this task. The driving sequences took about 10 minutes to finish. Drivers talking by cell phone drove significantly worse than drivers talking to passengers. The cell phone users were more likely to drift in their lane, kept a greater distance between their car and the car in front, and were 4 times more likely to miss pulling off the highway at the prescribed rest area. Passenger conversation barely affected all 3 measures. The author said that the problems could have stemmed from inattention blindness or insufficient processing of information from the driving environment. Cell phone users may also have found it harder to hold in working memory the intent to exit at the specific rest area. When driving tasks got more complicated, drivers appeared to modulate the complexity of their speech as measured by syllables per word. Drivers also talked more when using cell phones, perhaps, the author speculated, because they were trying to control the conversation to avoid using the mental resources required to really listen to the other person. Meanwhile, passengers took an active role in supporting the driver, often talking about surrounding traffic. This shared situational awareness could have been helpful to the driver. So many people think of driving as a partially unconscious decision-making process, but it turns out our full attention does matter. Doing other things, even simple tasks, made a significant difference in driving decision-making. Just because a task is possible to accomplish doesn't mean we can do it 100% effectively with divided attention versus our full attention. So let's talk about consciousness and making decisions. So the definition of decision making, when we talk about this, when we say implicit versus explicit decisions, do we know the difference? Well, the definition of decision making for implicit decisions would be unconscious, automatic choices based on intuition or habits. Explicit decisions would be conscious or deliberate choices involving reasoning and reflection. Implicit decision-making characteristics include that they are often influenced by emotions and past experiences, they are fast and automatic, they can lead to biases or errors. And, for example, gut feelings or instincts in a social situation, those would be considered implicit decision-making situations. For explicit decision-making characteristics, they involve cognitive processes like analysis and reasoning. They are slower and more controlled. They reflect values, beliefs, and knowledge. And an example of explicit decision-making would be weighing pros and cons before making a choice. So, considering the things you do each day, like working, communicating with others, driving, and maybe schoolwork, imagine you are going into all of these complex tasks with an altered state of consciousness. Are you stressed? Are you exhausted? Are you distracted? These are important factors to consider when placing ourselves into a context where we need to make decisions. So, exhaustion can significantly impact cognitive functions, influencing both implicit and explicit decision-making abilities. So, if we think about this, the impact on explicit decision-making would be reduced cognitive capacity. So, fatigue impairs analytical thinking and problem-solving skills. We could have difficulty concentrating, which could lead us to less effective ability to weigh our options. And there's an increased likelihood of errors, so there's a higher chance of making hasty decisions or overlooking critical information. Also, the impact on implicit decision making would be we have a heightened reliance on intuition. When we are exhausted, individuals may rely more on gut feelings or habitual responses rather than thoughtful analysis. So stress can also significantly impact cognitive functions, and this influences our level of awareness and conscious processing ability. This causes narrowed focus or tunnel vision. High levels of stress can lead to tunnel vision, limiting the ability to see the bigger picture. Important details may be overlooked, leading to poor decision making. The impact on explicit decision making is impaired cognitive function, so stress can reduce the brain's ability to think critically and process information. Difficulty in evaluating the pros and cons or considering long-term consequences, and an increased decision-making fatigue challenge, making it harder to engage in thorough, reflective decision making. Its impact on implicit decision-making includes heightened emotional responses, so it could amplify our emotional reactions, leading to impulsive decisions that are based on fear or anxiety. Our reliance on heuristics, so under stress, individuals might default to quick, heuristic-based decisions rather than thoughtful considerations, increasing the risk of bias. What are heuristics? They are cognitive processes that are efficient but ignore some information. Heuristics are mental shortcuts that the brain uses to make decisions quickly based on generalizations or rules of thumb. Because using heuristics saves effort, the classical view has been that heuristic decisions imply greater errors than do rational decisions. So, to wrap up this piece on consciousness, when we consider our ability to make decisions and what ways our consciousness can be impacted by different stressors, we should try to be aware of what we are doing and when, and try not to place ourselves in risk situations based on understanding these factors. Being overly tired, stressed, in an unstable mental state, or being on certain medications can alter our level of consciousness. Driving, making legal decisions, making relationship decisions, performing work processes, and having important communications should all be done when our thinking is clear. So at this point, we do a class activity where people are invited to share times when they may have had an altered state of consciousness that impacted their decision-making ability. My examples would be posting the wrong things in the wrong class on our LMS. Also, it could be feeding the dogs dinner twice, or making something that I cook all the time and doing it wrong, like skipping a major step, like leaving off the sauce on a pizza. Now we'll talk about sleep. At this point, I asked the class to go ahead and share how many hours they normally sleep. So basically, the answers usually range from around 4 to around 9, depending on the group of people that are in the class. So there's kind of an interesting range. So what is a circadian rhythm? At this point, I asked the class if anybody knows, and we try to share some information about what people might think this means. So our circadian rhythm takes about 24 hours. This is the sleep-wake cycle. So for sleep, there's different stages of sleep, and they all have different purposes. So a circadian rhythm is, again, about 24 hours, but there are age-related and individual differences between people. Older people tend to need less sleep than younger people, and medications or other stimulants do make a difference in people's circadian rhythm being regular. The sleep-wake cycle is controlled by the hypothalamus, which is responsible for regulating the pituitary gland, which controls hormone levels. Our hypothalamus releases melatonin, which is linked to sleep. So let's talk about some other things that are happening in regard to sleep. The role of serotonin is really important. It's actually one of the most important brain chemicals or neurotransmitters for regulating the sleep-wake cycle. Diets high in the amino acid tryptophan can maintain healthy serotonin levels, but lifestyle choices like constant travel and an erratic sleep schedule can disrupt serotonin production. When serotonin levels are not normal, sleep disturbances and other issues can result, including depression and chronic fatigue syndrome. Even in the 21st century, sleep is not fully understood. However, we do know that serotonin plays a definite role in sleep cycles, as high levels of serotonin are associated with wakefulness and lower levels with sleep. So serotonin is also synthesized by the pineal gland to make melatonin, the hormone that is directly related to healthy sleep. When melatonin is taken as a dietary supplement, it helps people with sleep disorders get to sleep more quickly, and this is according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. However, excess melatonin levels can also lead to trouble sleeping and other health issues. So dream formation is another part that we're going to talk about with regard to sleep. So while serotonin levels are lower in sleep than while we are awake, they are at their lowest during REM sleep, which is also known as dreaming sleep. Neurons with serotonin receptors are active during all stages of sleep until REM, so they appear to act as REM inhibitors most of the time. When serotonin levels drop, the neurotransmitter acetylcholine rises in the brain. This is why many antidepressants reduce dreaming sleep, because increasing serotonin levels inhibits the rise of acetylcholine. Low serotonin levels result in sleep disruption and sleep disorders, including insomnia. Stress is a common cause of low serotonin levels, resulting in a snowballing feedback cycle of disrupted sleep, depression, anxiety, and fatigue during the day. You can give your sleep life a jump start by eating foods high in tryptophan, which is a precursor to serotonin, as well as by getting daily exercise. In general, high carbohydrate foods like potatoes and grains have tryptophan, as do most cheeses and meats. Sleep disruption. So, mindfulness practices such as meditation and yoga are also linked to higher levels of serotonin. And high levels of serotonin may lead to feelings of bliss and happiness, but there can be too much of a good thing. Excess serotonin levels are toxic to the brain and can lead to a condition known as serotonin syndrome. So, do we know the stages of sleep? How many are there and what are they called? So, the stages of sleep are now understood by the American Academy of Sleep Medicine to be REM sleep, stage 1 or N1, stage 2 or N2, and then they've recently grouped 3 and 4 together and now they're called N3. So, brain waves are patterns of electrical activity in the brain. Researchers use these to categorize the stages of sleep. These are measured through an electroencephalogram. Two kinds of sleep exist. We have REM sleep and non-REM sleep. REM equals rapid eye movement sleep, and non-REM is everything else. So during REM sleep, this is a stage of sleep during which our eyes move rapidly under our eyelids, and this person, we are typically dreaming. Voluntary muscle movement is inhibited, and a person in REM sleep does not move around much and cannot act out their dreams. Although, disclaimer, there is actually a disorder in which muscles are not inhibited during REM and the person can react behaviorally to their vivid and bizarre dreams. This can be dangerous. Non-REM sleep includes all stages of sleep that are not REM. So, non-REM sleep tends to be a deeper, more restful sleep during which a person's voluntary muscles are free to move. The different waves that are observed when people are sleeping include beta waves, which are small and fast, and they indicate mental activity and that the person is wide awake and alert. Alpha waves are when a person becomes more relaxed and drowsy, and their brain will show these waves. They are large and slow. Theta waves are what happens when a person is drifting off to sleep. They are larger and slower than alpha waves. And then delta waves are the longest, slowest ones. Those are non-REM sleep. So stage 1 or N1, this is light non-REM sleep. There are decreased alpha waves, increased theta waves, and it's characterized by hypnagogic images or hallucinations and the hypnic jerk, where a person is half asleep and their leg or body or part of their body kind of jerks violently. So the hypnic jerk is a neurological kind of tussle between brain systems that keep you awake and the ones that encourage you to fall asleep. So during this transitional state, the sleeping mechanism usually wins, but the wakeful one sometimes puts up a fight. As you fall asleep, your muscles relax, but the awake part may still be stimulated enough that it will temporarily overreact, and you get this jerk in muscle activity. This is usually harmless, but it is very startling. It also can be worsened by sleep deprivation, having too much caffeine or tobacco, and taking stimulant medications like Adderall or Ritalin, for example, or other drugs that have stimulating qualities. Stage 2 or N2 is non-REM sleep. There's a decrease in body temperature, a slowing of heart rate, and breathing becomes more shallow. The brain continues to show theta waves. The brain also starts to show sleep spindles. Sleep spindles are it's a rapid burst of higher frequency brain waves that may be important for learning and memory. Stage 3 and 4, or N3, is non-REM sleep, it's deep sleep, and it's characterized by delta waves, the longest, slowest waves. This is a deep sleep, and also growth hormone is released during this stage. So here's an EEG recording of some sleep waves. So you can see when the difference between awake and asleep. You can also see in that stage 2, the sleep spindles are kind of in the middle. You can see how it's all consistent, and then there's this giant kind of bunch of activity, and then it's all consistent again. Here is a video that I will link below. So as a person falls asleep, they will progress through stages 1 through 4, or N1 through N3, then go back through 3 and 2 before entering REM. And during REM, brainwave activity resembles beta waves. Brain activity is more similar to waking than it is during other stages of sleep. During REM, a person's body temperature rises and their heart rate increases. 90% of dreams take place in REM. Though people dream in other stages of sleep, The dreams that occur in REM tend to be those very detailed, vivid, bizarre dreams that the person might remember the next day. So why do we dream? We do have a biological explanation for why this could be happening. So the pons is a brain area that serves as a bridge between lower and upper brain areas. Lower brain areas are for basic life-sustaining functions like heart rate and breathing, while upper brain areas are for conscious thought or more complicated things. The pons sends a message to the cortex, which is the area that interprets sights and sounds. When awake, the messages sent from the pons to the cortex correspond to reality, but during sleep, the pons still sends random signals to the cortex. The random signals do not correspond to any external reality. It is up to the cortex to interpret these signals. During sleep, the cortex makes sense of these random signals by making up a story to explain them, known as the activation synthesis hypothesis. This helps to explain why dreams can be so bizarre. Have you ever looked at a social media feed before going to bed and then ended up dreaming about a high school friend you haven't talked to or thought about in forever? This could be explained by a revision of the activation synthesis hypothesis. This revision is known as the activation information mode model. AIM argues that information accessed during waking hours can influence how the brain interprets signals from the pons during sleep. When your cortex is making up a story to explain the patterns of signals from the pons, it uses information from earlier in the day, like what you might have seen on your social media feed, to help create that story. So here I asked the class if they want to share any recollections of odd dreams they may have had. And I have an example. So when I was looking for the house that I live in now to make a purchase, I kept having dreams that my GPS would not take me anywhere at all while driving because we were struggling to find a place that was good and in our price range. So I woke up really weirded out for many weeks. From the biological perspective, my mind was probably trying to rationalize through the fact that no decision was being made over and over. So all of that kept coming back when I slept. So why do we dream? Well, according to psychoanalysis, which was developed by Sigmund Freud as a way to understand underlying causes of patients' disorders and symptoms, he felt that maybe dreams are kind of a window into what's going on. He realized that his patients suffered from symptoms and disorders that did not have any obvious physical cause. Today, we would call this mental illness, but then we didn't really have a name for it. So he believed his patients repressed threatening desires, urges, or conflicts and trauma to their unconscious mind. And by repressing this, patients would not have to think about them consciously. Freud felt that repressed thoughts trying to surface and fight their way out led to his patients' symptoms. So to alleviate these symptoms, he thought he needed to get to the bottom of these conflicts, urges, or desires. Because these were unconscious, his patients were unable to talk directly about them. Freud believed that patients' dreams portrayed conflicts, events, and desires in symbolic form. So Freud thought that dreams had two types of content, manifest content and latent content. Manifest content is the actual dream itself, while latent content is the hidden underlying meaning of a dream. So for example, Freud might have argued that if you dream about royalty, the hidden meaning behind your dream might be related to your parents. In this example, royalty would be the manifest content, while your parents are the latent content. And in case you're unfamiliar with the word latent, it's an adjective, and it means of a quality or state that is existing but not yet developed or manifested, so hidden or concealed. An example might be, she had a latent talent for singing. She didn't know until she tried, and then her talent was revealed in music class. Another example might be, the crime scene investigators identifying latent fingerprints at the scene. This means these fingerprints were not visible or obvious until they were treated with a substance that made them visible. So manifest content is the literal storyline and imagery of the dream that is remembered upon waking up. Surface level details are often bizarre or nonsensical. This represents the dreamer's experiences, thoughts, and emotions. So dreaming about flying over a city could represent a desire for freedom or escape. Latent content is the hidden symbolic meaning behind the dream, often reflecting unconscious desires or fears. This requires interpretation to uncover its significance. It may reveal unresolved conflicts or suppressed emotions. For example, the flying dream in this instance might symbolize a wish to rise above personal challenges or a desire for independence. Now let's talk about hypnosis. This is an altered state of consciousness in which a person is especially susceptible to suggestion. This means a person who is hypnotized is more open to and affected by suggestion than someone who is not hypnotized. To hypnotize someone, the hypnotist will tell that person to focus on what's being said, relax and feel tired, let go and accept a situation, and use a vivid imagination. So there are many myths and misconceptions about hypnosis. The information found here that we're going to talk about today is based on scientific research and data. Hypnosis can be effective for treating pain, anxiety, and cravings, but this method of treatment will not be effective for everyone. Only willing participants can be hypnotized, and some people are more susceptible to hypnotic suggestion than others. When a person is hypnotized, they enter a more relaxed state and may be willing to do things they'd ordinarily shy away from, like clucking like a chicken or doing an embarrassing dance. This is because the hypnotist now shoulders the blame for the hypnotized person's possibly weird or embarrassing actions. It's important to note, however, that a person generally cannot be hypnotized to do something that they find truly objectionable. So how does it work? The theory of dissociation argues that hypnosis works on the conscious mind, while another part of the mind remains aware of what's going on. This is similar to the divided consciousness that we discussed earlier and helps to explain why a person cannot be hypnotized to do something that they find truly objectionable, because part of their mind does remain aware of what's going on. Social cognitive explanation. This is that a hypnotized person is more likely, is potentially playing the role expected of them in that particular situation. This theory argues that people act how they think they should act, though the hypnotized person may not be consciously aware that they are simply playing a role. This evidence for this theory comes from studies showing that people who are not hypnotized can behave as if they were and copy the actions of a hypnotized person. People who have no pre-existing ideas about how a hypnotized person acts are harder to hypnotize. Now we'll talk a little bit about psychoactive drugs. These are substances that alter thinking, perception, and memory. These drugs are capable of producing physical or psychological dependence. Physical dependence occurs when a person's body is unable to function normally without a particular drug, characterized by tolerance and withdrawal. Withdrawal is the physical symptom or symptoms that a person experiences when they do not use a drug their body has become accustomed to using. So when someone who drinks coffee every day does not have coffee, they experience the caffeine withdrawal symptom of a headache. Psychological dependence is the belief that a drug is needed to sustain a feeling of emotional or psychological well-being. A person thinks they need the drug in order to function or to feel content. This belief can happen with any drug and can last indefinitely. Several categories of psychoactive drugs include stimulants, depressants, narcotics, and hallucinogenics. Stimulants increase the functioning of the nervous system, while depressants decrease the functioning of the nervous system. Narcotics are a kind of depressant that is derived from the opium poppy. And hallucinogenics alter perceptions and may cause hallucinations. That concludes this part of this module's lecture. Thank you for listening.